The executive floor conference room at North Point Properties overlooked Lake Ontario, but Marcus Stone wasn't admiring the scenery. At 58 years old, with 18 years of impeccable service, he found himself sitting across from Graham Vickers, the brand new chief technology officer who'd been with the company for all of 6 months. "We can get 3 junior engineers for your salary," Graham said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, adjusting his designer glasses. "Nothing personal, Marcus. Just cost-cutting." Marcus felt like he'd been punched in the stomach, but he maintained his composure. Diane Morrison from Human Resources slid a folder across the polished table. "The severance package is generous," she murmured without making eye contact. 2 months' salary plus your accrued vacation time." For a moment, Marcus thought about the nights he'd spent in this very office, solving system crises at 2 a.m., designing solutions that kept the company running smoothly for nearly 2 decades. He thought about the emails he'd sent, pleading for a documentation team, for resources to do things right, all rejected with the promise of next quarter. "Is that all you have to say?" Graham looked almost disappointed, as if he'd expected an emotional outburst, something he could report to the board about how difficult Marcus was being. "What would you like me to say?" Marcus shrugged. "Seems pretty straightforward to me." Marcus had come to North Point Properties, then called Bayview Estates, when it was a small real estate management firm with 4 apartment complexes and a dozen employees. Their entire IT infrastructure consisted of 2 desktop computers, a fax machine, and a dial-up internet connection. Harold Bayview, the founder, had hired him away from a consulting gig in Syracuse. "We're expanding," Harold had told him. "Need someone who can build us something solid." Over 18 years, Marcus had transformed that rudimentary setup into an integrated property management system that handled everything from tenant applications and background checks to automated maintenance requests and rent collection across 63 properties in 4 states. He'd built it piece by piece, adapting, upgrading, refining as the company grew. When Harold retired 5 years ago, his son Justin sold the company to a private equity firm that rebranded it as North Point Properties. At first, they kept Marcus on, impressed by what he'd built. But things began to change. New executives, new priorities. Quarterly targets became more important than long-term stability. The warning signs had come gradually. First, they rejected his proposal for a documentation team. "Too expensive," they said. "We'll get to it next quarter." That quarter never came. Then they started bringing in consultants, young MBA types who talked about disrupting property management and leveraging cloud solutions. They'd sit through his explanations of the system architecture with glazed eyes, then recommend off-the-shelf solutions that wouldn't integrate with the existing custom infrastructure. Marcus kept pushing back, explaining why their approach wouldn't work, showing them the custom code that made the system unique. Eventually, they stopped inviting him to planning meetings. Elena had noticed it before he did. "They're pushing you out," she said one night over dinner. "You need to prepare." Marcus had brushed off her concerns. "They need me. No one else understands how the whole system works together." "That might be exactly the problem," she had replied. 6 months ago, they hired Graham as the new CTO. He came from a banking software company and immediately started talking about standardization and legacy system replacement. He hired 3 junior engineers fresh out of college and had them shadowing Marcus, asking questions about the system. Marcus answered their questions, but he knew they weren't grasping the complexities. How could they? It had taken him years to build those systems, to understand the interdependencies, to create the redundancies that kept everything running smoothly when problems arose. Last week, Graham had stopped by his office. "Quick meeting tomorrow morning," he'd said casually. "Just a quarterly check-in." Marcus should have seen it coming. Now sitting in that conference room, Marcus took the folder and stood up. "Thank you. Is that all?" Graham exchanged glances with Diane, both clearly perplexed by his calm. What they didn't understand was that Marcus wasn't calm. He was done. There's a difference. "Well, we'd appreciate your help with the transition," Graham continued. "The new engineering team will need some guidance on the system architecture, perhaps a consulting arrangement for a few weeks." "I'll think about it," Marcus said, knowing he wouldn't. They shook hands. Marcus cleared out his desk without complaint. 18 years of work fit into a single cardboard box. He nodded goodbye to a few colleagues who looked away awkwardly, afraid the same fate awaited them. As he walked to his truck in the parking garage, his phone buzzed. A text from Alan Reeves, the database administrator he'd hired 12 years ago. "Marcus, the whole team's freaking out." Marcus didn't respond. At home, he sat on his deck overlooking Lake Ontario, nursing a glass of bourbon, watching the sunset paint the water copper. Elena placed a hand on his shoulder. "What will you do now?" Marcus shrugged. "Something will turn up." What Graham didn't know, what he hadn't bothered to learn, was that Marcus hadn't just built North Point systems. He had custom-coded large sections himself with minimal documentation because the company had always refused to fund a proper documentation team. Only Marcus understood the deep redundancies, the hidden security layers, the intricate network architecture, and he wasn't planning to explain it to anyone now. 2 weeks after his termination, Marcus was in his home office updating his resume when his phone rang. Graham Vickers. He let it go to voicemail. "Marcus, it's Graham. We're having some issues with the tenant portal. The junior team is working on it, but they're having trouble understanding some of your code architecture. Could you give us a call back? It would just be a quick consultation." Marcus deleted the message and went back to his resume. 3 more calls came that day, each voicemail sounding increasingly desperate. By evening, Alan texted him, "System's been down all day. Maintenance requests aren't processing. Graham's losing his mind." The next morning, Diane from HR called. "Marcus, I hope you're doing well. I'm calling because we'd like to discuss a consulting arrangement. Just temporary, to help with some current system issues. The compensation would be quite generous." Marcus picked up his phone. "How generous?" $300 per hour, minimum 4-hour engagement. "I'll think about it and get back to you," Marcus said, then hung up. He sat at his kitchen table, staring out at the lake. Elena placed a cup of coffee in front of him. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking they're finding out exactly what I'm worth." But Marcus knew this was just the beginning. The systems he'd built were like an iceberg. The visible part was just a small fraction of the whole. And as the days passed, Graham and his junior team would discover exactly how deep that iceberg went. Chapter 2. The Redemption. Over the next 3 days, the calls from North Point increased. Graham, Diane, even Justin Bayview, who was still on the board. The tenant portal was down. The maintenance scheduling system was throwing errors. The automatic payment processing had failed, affecting thousands of residents. Marcus didn't respond to any of them. On day 4, an email arrived from Sterling Solutions, a regional competitor to North Point. They managed fewer properties but had been expanding rapidly. The email was from their director of technology, Lawrence Sterling himself. "Marcus, I heard about your situation at North Point. We've always admired your work from afar. Would you be interested in discussing opportunities with us? We're looking to upgrade our entire property management infrastructure." Marcus replied and set up a meeting for the following day. That evening, as Elena and he were preparing dinner, the doorbell rang. Graham Vickers stood on his porch, his designer glasses slightly askew, his normally immaculate suit wrinkled. "Marcus, I apologize for dropping by unannounced, but we have an emergency situation. The entire system is down. Nothing is working. The team can't figure out what's wrong or how to fix it." Marcus leaned against the doorframe. "That sounds serious." "It is. We need your help. The board has authorized me to offer you a substantial consulting fee. $500 per hour, whatever it takes." Marcus thought about the cardboard box in his garage. 18 years of work reduced to a few mementos. He thought about nothing personal, just cost cutting. He thought about the documentation team they'd never approved. "I'm sorry to hear about your troubles," Marcus said quietly, "but I have an interview tomorrow. Something will turn up, just like I thought." He closed the door on Graham's stunned face and went back to making dinner. For the first time since his termination, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just clarity. He wasn't going to help them fix what they'd broken. The interview with Lawrence Sterling went better than expected. They met at a coffee shop in downtown Rochester, away from both companies' offices. "I've followed your work for years," Lawrence said, stirring his coffee. That integrated property management system you built at North Point is legendary in our industry. Nobody else has anything close to it. Thank you, Marcus said. It took time. That's what I want to talk about. Time. We're looking to build something similar, but we don't want to start from scratch. We need someone who understands the architecture, the integration points, the security layers. Someone who can build us something better than what's out there. I'm interested, Lawrence smiled. Good, because I'm prepared to offer you the position of Chief Systems Architect. Full benefits, stock options, and a salary 20% higher than what you were making at North Point. It was a good offer. Too good almost. Why me? Marcus asked. There are younger engineers out there. Cheaper ones. Lawrence laughed. You sound like your former employer. We tried that route. Hired 3 bright young engineers from top schools. They built us something sleek and modern that crashes every time we get more than 100 simultaneous users. We don't need cheap. We need reliable. Marcus accepted the offer the next day. Meanwhile, North Point's problems were escalating. Alan kept him updated through occasional texts. The system had been partially restored, but critical functions were still failing. They'd brought in an expensive consulting firm that specialized in legacy system recovery. A week after Marcus started at Sterling, Graham called again. Marcus, please. This is getting serious. We've lost access to payment records for the past 3 months. Tenants are complaining about incorrect charges. The consulting team says they need your input on the database structure. Marcus was tempted to ignore it, but something made him pick up. Graham, I'm employed elsewhere now. Exclusive contract. I'm afraid I can't help you. We'll double whatever they're paying you for just 2 days of your time. It's not about the money. Then what is it about? Revenge? Are you enjoying watching us struggle? Marcus paused, considering his answer carefully. No, Graham, I'm not enjoying it. But you made a business decision. You decided my experience wasn't worth the cost. Now you're discovering what that actually means. The board wants to discuss bringing you back. Full salary plus a signing bonus. For a moment, Marcus felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it quickly faded. Going back would solve nothing. The same executives who decided he was expendable would be waiting for the next opportunity to cut costs. I appreciate the offer, but I've made a commitment to Sterling Solutions. Graham's voice hardened. You know there could be legal implications if we discover you intentionally made our systems difficult to maintain. Non-compete clauses, intellectual property concerns. There it was, the threat Marcus had been expecting. The system is exactly as it was when the company repeatedly denied my request for a documentation team, Marcus replied evenly. Every line of code belongs to North Point as specified in my employment contract. I've taken nothing with me except my experience. But feel free to have your lawyers contact mine. Marcus hung up, hands shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from anger he hadn't allowed himself to feel until now. The accusation that he'd somehow sabotaged them was the final insult. At Sterling, Marcus was starting fresh, building systems properly from the ground up. Full documentation, training programs for the engineering team, redundancies that would prevent the kind of catastrophe North Point was experiencing. He wasn't going to look back anymore, but he wasn't going to help them either. Some lessons had to be learned the hard way. A month after joining Sterling Solutions, Marcus received an unexpected visitor in his new office. Alan, his former database administrator, stood awkwardly in the doorway holding a laptop bag. Got time for lunch? He asked. Over sandwiches at a nearby deli, Alan filled him in on the chaos at North Point. It's worse than you think, he said, lowering his voice despite the noisy lunchtime crowd. They've lost access to historical data going back 3 years. The backup systems are corrupted somehow. The consulting firm is saying they might need to rebuild from scratch. Marcus wasn't surprised. The backup system had multiple redundancies and security protocols that needed to be followed precisely. Skip one step, and the entire process would fail in a way designed to protect tenant data from unauthorized access. That's not all, Alan continued. I found something when I was trying to help the consultants understand the payment processing system. Graham had been planning your termination for months. He'd been meeting with the board, convincing them that your custom infrastructure was too expensive to maintain. How do you know this? Alan pulled out his laptop and showed Marcus a series of emails he discovered in the system archives. Emails between Graham and the board discussing the legacy staff reduction plan and specifically naming Marcus as the first target. He told them they could replace you with cheaper engineers and transition to off-the-shelf solutions within 6 months, Alan said. He projected cost savings of over $1 million annually. Marcus read through the emails, feeling a strange detachment. One line from Graham stood out. Stone's custom systems are unnecessarily complex. He's made himself indispensable by design, not necessity. There's more, Alan said. The private equity firm that owns North Point is planning to sell. They've been prepping for this for over a year. Graham was brought in specifically to cut costs and make the company look more profitable before the sale. Now it all made sense. The push for standardization, the resistance to proper documentation, the sudden focus on reducing senior staff costs. It wasn't about improving the company. It was about dressing it up for a quick flip. Why are you showing me this? Marcus asked. Alan closed his laptop. Because I quit yesterday, and I'm not the only one. Half the IT department has left. The consultants are estimating at least 6 months to restore full functionality, maybe longer. He hesitated. And because North Point's biggest client, Westbrook Properties, is considering jumping ship. They've lost faith in the management system. Marcus thought about the implications. Westbrook represented nearly 30% of North Point's revenue. Losing them would be devastating, especially with a sale pending. What will you do now? Marcus asked. Alan grinned. Actually, I was hoping Sterling might be hiring database administrators. Later that afternoon, Marcus spoke with Lawrence about bringing Alan on board. He agreed immediately. They were building a team, brick by brick, with people who understood what it meant to create systems that lasted. That evening, Marcus received another call from Graham. This time, his voice had lost its authoritative edge. Marcus, please, the situation is critical. Westbrook is threatening to terminate their contract. The board is questioning my decisions. We need your help. I'm sorry, Graham, I can't help you. Name your price. Anything. It's not about price, it's about respect. For experience. For the work that goes into building something right the first time. The line was silent for a moment. You knew this would happen, Graham said finally. You knew exactly what would break and when. No, Graham. I just knew what I had built and what it took to maintain it. Information I tried to share many times. Marcus ended the call feeling neither triumph nor regret. Just the quiet certainty that some lessons can only be learned through failure. The opportunity came faster than expected. 2 months into his role at Sterling Solutions, Lawrence called Marcus into his office. I just got off the phone with Jeffrey Westbrook, he said, referring to the CEO of Westbrook Properties. They're officially terminating their contract with North Point next month. They want to know if we can handle their portfolio. Westbrook Properties managed over 10,000 units across the Northeast. It would more than double Sterling's current operations. We're not ready for that kind of scale, Marcus admitted. The new system is coming along, but it's only halfway there. Lawrence leaned forward. What would it take to get ready? If we had to? Marcus thought about it. 3 more senior engineers, dedicated server infrastructure, and at least 8 weeks of development time. Even then, it would be tight. Jeffrey's desperate. North Point's failures are affecting their reputation with tenants. He's willing to give us 12 weeks and fund the infrastructure expansion. This was the moment, the turning point. If Sterling took on Westbrook and succeeded, it would establish them as a serious competitor in the industry. If they failed, it could sink both companies. Let me think about the architecture, Marcus said. I'll have a plan by tomorrow. That night, Marcus barely slept. He sketched system diagrams, mapped data migration pathways, considered scaling challenges. By morning, he had a plan, ambitious but achievable, a hybrid approach that would let them onboard Westbrook's properties in stages, minimizing disruption. When he presented it to Lawrence, he studied it carefully. This is solid, he said finally. But I notice you've included a substantial documentation phase. That adds 3 weeks to the timeline. It's non-negotiable, Marcus replied. That's where North Point failed. We document everything from day one. We train the team on every component. No single points of failure. Lawrence nodded. I'll take your word for it. Let's move forward. The next weeks were intense. They hired 5 more engineers, including 2 who had recently left Northpoint. Alan built a database migration tool that could translate Northpoint's data structure into their new system. Marcus designed a modular architecture that could scale with Westbrook's needs. Halfway through the project, Marcus received an email from Justin Bayview, the former owner's son who still sat on Northpoint's board. Marcus, I want to apologize for how things ended. The board was misled about the implications of letting you go. Graham has been removed as CTO. We're struggling to recover, and Westbrook's departure will hit us hard. If you're ever interested in coming back, the door is open. Marcus didn't respond. 10 weeks into their 12-week timeline, they were ready for a staged rollout. Westbrook's smallest region, comprising 2,000 units in western New York, would migrate first. If successful, the remaining regions would follow. The day before the migration, Lawrence called Marcus into his office again. A familiar face was waiting, Jeffrey Westbrook himself. "So you're the systems architect?" Jeffrey said, standing to shake Marcus's hand. "Lawrence has told me a lot about you." "All good, I hope." Jeffrey smiled. "He says you've built us something that won't break down every time we add a new property, something that will grow with us." "That's the plan." "I also hear you used to work for Northpoint." Marcus nodded, unsure where he was going with this. "They're in trouble, you know. The private equity firm is trying to sell, but with Westbrook leaving and their system still not fully functional, they're not finding many interested buyers." He paused. "Except one." "Who's that?" Marcus asked, though he suspected the answer. "Sterling Solutions," Lawrence said. "We're considering making an offer, at a substantial discount to what they were valued at 6 months ago." Marcus looked between them, processing the implications. "If that happens," Jeffrey continued, "we'd want someone who understands both companies to lead the integration. Someone who could salvage what's valuable from Northpoint's infrastructure while transitioning everything to your new architecture." "Are you asking if I'd be willing to work on that?" Marcus clarified. Lawrence nodded. "Only if the acquisition goes through, and only if you're comfortable with it." Marcus thought about the irony. The system he'd built, the people he'd trained, the company that had discarded him, all potentially coming back under his direction. "I'd be willing," Marcus said finally, "but I have one condition. We do it right. Full documentation, proper training, no shortcuts." "Agreed," Lawrence said. "We've learned that lesson." As Marcus walked back to his office, he felt no vindication, no desire for revenge, just the simple satisfaction of knowing that good work, done right, eventually speaks for itself. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the lobby of what had once been Northpoint Properties headquarters. The sign now read Sterling Integrated Property Management. The acquisition had gone through for less than a quarter of what the company had been valued at before his departure. Lawrence and Marcus walked through the office, greeting former Northpoint employees who would be staying on through the transition. Some looked away awkwardly, others smiled with relief. A few, those who had worked closely with Marcus over the years, nodded with quiet understanding. Graham was gone, along with most of the executive team that had approved Marcus's termination. Justin Bayview had stayed on as a consultant, helping ease the transition with legacy clients. When they reached the server room, Marcus's old domain, he paused. Through the glass, he could see the hardware he'd specified, the blinking lights of systems he'd designed. "Want to go in?" Lawrence asked. "No need," Marcus replied. "We'll be migrating everything to the new infrastructure anyway." In the main conference room, the remaining Northpoint staff had gathered for the announcement. Lawrence introduced Marcus as the Chief Integration Officer, who would be overseeing the technical transition. "Many of you already know Marcus," he said. "He built the original systems that ran this company for nearly 2 decades. Now he'll be guiding us through the integration of both companies' technologies into something better than either had before." As Marcus looked out at the faces, some familiar, some new, he felt no triumph, no desire to say, "I told you so." What would be the point? Instead, he spoke briefly about the transition plan, the timeline, the support that would be available to everyone during the process. He emphasized that no one would be left behind due to cost-cutting measures. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. 1 year after the acquisition, Sterling Integrated Property Management had become the largest property management company in the Northeast. The migration was complete, with all properties now running on the new system Marcus designed, fully documented, properly staffed, and functioning smoothly. On a crisp autumn morning, Marcus drove to the office for a final meeting with Lawrence. The leaves along Lake Ontario had turned brilliant shades of red and gold, a fitting backdrop for the conclusion of this chapter. "The board approved your proposal," Lawrence said as soon as Marcus sat down. "The technical education division will launch next quarter. You'll have full autonomy to design the curriculum and hire instructors." This had been Marcus's condition for staying after the integration was complete. Not a higher title or more money, but the creation of a division dedicated to training the next generation of systems engineers and architects, teaching them not just how to code, but how to build things meant to last. "Thank you," Marcus said. "That means a lot." "No, thank you," Lawrence replied. "What you've built here, it's remarkable. Not just the technology, but the culture around it. The documentation, the knowledge sharing, the emphasis on quality over quick fixes." Later that afternoon, Marcus cleared out his integration office. Unlike his hasty exit from North Point, this was a planned transition to his new role. As he packed his things, Justin Bayview knocked on the door. "Got a minute?" he asked. They walked to the small courtyard outside the building. "My father asked about you," Justin said. "He's retired in Florida now, but he still follows company news. He was glad to hear you were back, in a manner of speaking." "How is Harold?" Marcus asked. "Good. Fishing a lot." Justin paused. "He always said letting you go would be the biggest mistake this company could make. Turns out he was right." Marcus nodded, unsure what to say. "I learned something from all this," Justin continued. "Value isn't always visible until it's gone." As Marcus drove home along the lakeshore, he thought about value, about experience, about caretaking, about doing things right the first time, about systems built to last and the people who build them. He hadn't sought revenge. He hadn't needed to. He'd simply moved forward, building something better, something that would outlast any individual decision or short-term thinking. Sometimes the best response to being undervalued is simply to prove your worth elsewhere and let the results speak for themselves.